Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar Consumer Insights Power Up 2022. So my name is Shine, and I will be your host for today. So the digital age has given us the ability to collect insights faster and easier than ever before. And as marketing intel overflows with data, the challenge now at hand is identifying which is vital for our marketing efforts or not, especially when you think of the unpredictability of the business landscape. It's only best that we plan to prepare for any possible marketing crisis. And what better way to do that than to learn tried and tested methods used by marketing leaders themselves. So today we're going to have that conversation. We will do a deep dive into how you can make sense of your consumer and marketing data and turn these insights into perceptive actions and strategies. Together with some of the brilliant leaders in marketing in the region, we're going to find out how to mobilize your marketing insights and build a brand insight structure that would help you face challenges forward with renewed confidence. So before we officially start, I would like to remind you of a few basic house rules that we have for today. So all of you are muted, but we do encourage you that at any point you think of a question that you like our speakers to answer, please just send it in the Q&A chat box below and we will attend them later at the Q&A portion. So now I am pleased to introduce you to our presenter for today. She is Julie Nang, the co-founder and chief executive officer of Vase.ai, who will be discussing with us how to activate marketing intel into smart campaign actions and strategies. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Shaina. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, everyone. Now, in the next 20 minutes, I would like to answer the 3 most popular questions that marketers always ask me. So in my quest to offer my perspective in each of the questions that you're seeing now, we'll be looking at a real example of how different businesses apply this concept in real life to achieve growth. So the questions will be how to ensure ROI if we invest in consumer insights. Number 2, how do I make sure I get signals, I get useful data that I can actually use and not really noises in the consumer data. And number 3, how do I do all this with minimal resources? Now, I aim to share actionable techniques with you today. If, however, you wish to go deeper into any of the topic, it's part of a training I offer, and feel free to drop me a message should you wish to go deeper. So let's get started with the number 1 question I believe most of us have. How do we know we will get ROI, return of investment, if we pour not just money, but time and effort into consumer insights? Now, let's go all the way back to 2007 to answer this question. So in 2007, Facebook had 50 million monthly active users. And that time, they were growing at a rate to hit about 300 million users by 2012. So when Sheryl Sandberg started as CEO, she had a conversation with Chamath, which is the first head of growth at Facebook. And she asked Chamath, what do you want to focus on? So he said, I'm going to look at consumer behaviors and use that to change the product, do some SEO, do some SEM, apply some algorithm, etc. Now, Sandberg then asked Chamath, what do you call that? And he said, well, I'm not sure. I call it growth, right? We are going to try and grow. So that was the time the first official growth team was born. So the impact of Facebook growth team is undeniable. Facebook blew past that 300 million monthly active users projection and ended up hitting 1 billion users. That's like 3 times from their projections. Now, we definitely cannot attribute all of those Facebook success to their growth team, but it no doubt played a major role in the velocity of Facebook exponential growth. As a result, almost every other top company in Silicon Valley started to establish their own growth team, from LinkedIn to Pinterest to Uber to Slack and even Tesla. So what exactly did the growth team do? What exactly did the top companies recognize and embrace is these 3 critical points that they use consumer insights loop to drive their growth. So first, they actively see consumer insights as a feedback mechanism to almost everything they do. Second, they then direct that specific consumer insight feedback and ties it to a new business action. And third, they measure the outcome of this new action and again use the consumer insights that they measured from this new outcome as the feedback mechanism for their next action, and they repeat that, keep repeating that, right? So let's see how this really works in real life. So let's look at the case study here. This case study is about Tree. So Tree is a telco that operates in multiple countries. the team are faced with a challenge. They want to increase the roaming usage data. Now, when they are searching for ideas of the promotional campaign, here is the data that they look at. They look into the audience habit on what they typically posted in a holiday overseas. Quickly, they learn that people love to brag and show off. Now, they also look into, so what's stopping them? What's stopping the audience from posting more in a holiday overseas? Eventually, they found out that price, the roaming prices, is the big hurdle for them to post more. So armed with this consumer insights as the feedback, the team came up with a hypothesis to test. They were thinking, how much data would the audience use if the service was priced much lower? So with this hypothesis, the team carried out the research as an action item. Now, based on that, eventually, what they found out is the audience actually used 71 times more the amount of data that they would have used if the service was charged lower. And most of that extra data that they use is used to share holiday photos and selfies on social media. Now, based on that particular outcome of the experiment that they carried out in the test group, the creative planning team then creates a promotion that aimed to reduce the price of roaming tariff and couple it with a funny advertisement that themed around holiday spam. Now, the campaign eventually caused a 90% increase in the social conversation around the brand and off-the-chart brand metrics. So this is an example of how we can leverage the same concept of the growth team earlier by leveraging consumer insights and marketing use cases. Now, when we survey the marketers to understand how many of you are actually using data in your work, a whopping 90% say, yeah, I am using data in my work. So obviously everyone here is aware of using the data is important, right? But if you look at this chart, this is the chart that tells us the current data analytics landscape on all the platforms that you can use. It's very overwhelming, isn't it? So unfortunately, most people that I know got more confused by so many options of data around us. It's funny that now the problem we have is simply there are just too many data in the market, and especially when you see two sources of data seemingly conflict with each other, instead of helping us to be more clear and certain, many people actually got more confused. Now, this is what we call noise. Too much data that's not useful would cause you noise and actually distraction. And one of the top challenges that I hear marketers face now with data is actually not enough signal. Not enough signal that really tells me that I can act upon, that give me more clarity. So with all this data available to us, right, how do we make sure we get data that's useful, show us the right signal that we can act upon, while making sure we are not distracted by data that's simply meaningless? And first, here's a couple of keys that I wanted to share with you in how to gather signals. Number one, we want to be very intentional about what decision we would like to make. So I'm going to show you using the first case study that we saw just now. So the decision here in this case study is very straightforward. We are here to create a promotional campaign to increase usage data. So being very intentional about the decision that we want to make will help us to narrow down the data we need to collect. Now, second, with clear intention about what decision, we can now look for the right data source that will give us reliable data and, most importantly, very specific to our needs. We often see that just by doing this step right, it will save you 50%, at least 50% of the time at the analysis stage. So there are three different types of data out there. And here's how we categorize them. First, the what data. The what data typically tells you about what's happening, what's the consumer behavior. And generally, this is where we get our inspiration of ideas happen. Next, you have the why data. It is very important for us to supplement the why data, understanding the reason behind the what, because that's the only way we can replicate them. We can replicate the success again and again. So this usually is run by customized research that you would conduct to understand the reason behind the behaviors that you are trying to understand. Now, third, you have the how data. This is where you have an idea, you have an hypothesis, and you actually test them out either with a small scale testing within a research group or real testing of A/B testing, and that's the outcome data that you collected. So one of the more common mistakes that I saw happening is we are expecting the what data to tell us the why or the how, and simply they can't do that. And this is when overanalyzing or overinterpretation of the data happens here. So using the same case study here, we can see that there are actually 3 instances when data comes into play. So the first instance is when the team is coming up with the ideas for promotional campaign, they are using the what data. And the second instance is the research data to validate the idea that they have run. And that is the how data. Now, the third instance is again a usage data eventually to measure the entire outcome of their campaign. So in all these 3 different instances, what we see is that the intention about the data to collect, the decision making is just different. Last but not least, once we confirm all our data source is specific, we need to make sure one more thing. We need to make sure that the data actually comes from targeted audience that is relevant to us. This is very important to help us ensure the reliability of the data sources. And with all these 3 steps, what we should do is we need to have all these 3 things done before any data collection starts. And by being intentional, specific, and targeted, we can now stand a better chances of gathering signals and avoiding noises. Now, let's put this framework to play in another case study. Carslam is a Malaysia company turned unicorn early this year. Their platform specializes in used car buying and selling. Now, back in year 2018, when they are growing in just Malaysia alone in Kuala Lumpur, they are hoping to grow the adoption rate of their platform, which is something relatively new in the market. So this is their intentional decisions. Now, in order to get consumer feedback, they collaborated with us to help them understand how much really is their current brand awareness in the market. And among those brand awareness, people who are aware of them, how many of them is ready to try it out? So this is where they collect the what data to tell them the current state. We carried out a brand health study together with them, and they quickly found out that in KL alone, 19% of the population is aware of the brand, but there's only 9% of them is ready to try their services. So further in the study, they learned about the reasons of what's stopping the other people who are aware of them, but not ready to try the services. And turns out that in Malaysia, there has been a sentiment about we are not really trusting the used car dealership. People simply don't trust that they are being taken care by the used car dealer. And that same sentiment is being extended to Carson because people think they are just an online used car dealership. So this is the why data that they are gathering here. So armed with this feedback, what they do is the marketing team then hypothesized that they need to change the marketing messaging to address the trust concern that they found out. So here's what they changed. They changed the marketing messaging from the previous fast, fair, free to address much more accurate consumer concerns around trustworthiness. And after that, they measured over 4 iterations to see what is really the changes that is happening after they put those changes in mind. So every time they make a change, they measure it. Every time they make a change, they measure it again. So eventually, after 4 phases of iteration, the marketing team saw a brand lift from 19% to 27% of brand awareness. And because they specifically address the trust issue across used car dealership, consumers now see Carson as a different company, improve from 18% to 30%. So that marks a really positive lift of brand perception. And on top of that, they learned that one of the most effective ways to really put and address the actual customer concern about trust is to put actual customers in the ads, just like what I showed earlier. So to summarize, what we see from these 2 case studies is this: they successfully glean signals that they can act upon. And the marketing team actually get more clarity instead of getting more confusion from the noise. So what exactly is the common thread we see among these 2 case studies? Number 1, In order to confidently say that the consumer insights is indeed a signal and that lead us to an action and more clarity and not a noise, we need to meaningfully close at least one round of the feedback, action, and outcome loop. However, even if it's a signal and not a noise, we do see from a lot of experience that you need to close the loop at least twice in order to be able to get meaningful business result. In other words, return of investment that you can see in terms of increased brand lift or an increased number of leads or even sales. Second, in order to meaningfully close the entire loop, we need at least 3 types of data of consumer insights. We need data that tells the why, we need the data that tells the what, and the data that tells us the how. And most importantly, to gather the how data, we must perform an action on the hypothesis that we generated after we learned from the what and the why data. So in other words, we must put the ideas that we got inspired to test, whether or not it's testing within a customized research group or a small scale real A/B testing. So in other words, what we see is closed door discussion without the how data doesn't cut it. So the more we discuss and not acting and gather the how data, the more we will feel that the meeting is actually a distraction. So up to this point, I usually get a very common question next. Well, as a marketer, my main job is to run campaign, get results, not looking at research data, right? Because looking at research data requires time, energy, and often budget to run the research in the first place. So how do I do everything when I only have a few team members at my disposal? And what if I don't even have team members, right? Does that mean I should outsource the gathering of consumer insights? So here's a myth that I'd like to tackle today. Truth is, with today's technology, even research technology has evolved by a lot. So gathering and analyzing data has become much more ubiquitous with so many different platforms that's emerging in the market. So I want to show you a specific example that tells you how gathering consumer insight is at least 10 times easier and affordable than 5 years ago. Let's look at one of the research methodology that is conducting primary research by asking direct questions towards a group of people and get back the answers in the report. Excuse me. So this is a methodology that's particularly useful when it comes to gathering the why and the how data. So let's look at how this type of research methodology typically works. It consists of 3 steps. 1, designing the research. 2, collecting the data from respondents. 3, getting the report. Now, to go to all these steps, a traditional method takes around 1 to 3 months, and the budget would be upward of $15,000 per project. It involves outsourcing to a company and get back either raw data or researcher process report. And it's typically being used for one-off project or dedicated for strategic use case only because of the speed and the budget. Now let's look at how modern technology has enabled us. The same 3 steps now can be completed in 1 to 7 days. And the budget will be starting at $1,000. You can get a real-time dashboard that even layered with suggested insights and get guided session with researcher as soon as the research ended. And with the speed and the budget, what we see happening in the market now is being used as an agile method to complement the agile marketing. So if you compare these 2 different way of how it evolution rate, it's a 10 times difference from the point of view of effort, budget, and resources. The time that you typically spend using the traditional method to talk to outsource company on aligning the research would not easily be the same time you spend time carrying out the research and get back results in the modern way. Let me use another real life example to bring home the idea. So this is a marketing agency case study in Malaysia named Ideologic, who is looking for the what and the why data to strengthen their marketing strategy pitch to their client. However, there are some problems. First, they're pressed for time because the pitch is due in 2 weeks' time. On top of it, to gather consumer insights that will be really targeted, specific to them, they need a research that gather data from a subset of group that reflect the entire Malaysia population. To add another layer of challenges, this is an internal effort by the agency. They simply do not have a big research budget. Now, coupled with these challenges, the founder Pivo decided to use our approach to gather consumer insights. Using the modern approach, Ideology successfully get a targeted research that represent a mini Malaysia conducted within 3 days, start to end. Our researcher helps to provide suggestions on how to design the research better, and our platform even clean out all invalid data and helps to remove a lot of the analysis time by showing suggested insights on the fly. So on top of it, what the founder really appreciates is he has the full control of the research design throughout the entire process. And that is helping him a lot because he gets the specific what and why data that can build directly into his marketing strategy pitch. Now, this example that we show here is to just illustrate the point that doing research and gathering consumer insights is not really as resource intensive as how it's like 5 years ago. And if you're still using the same method that you used 3 to 5 years ago, I would like to invite you to have a review of your consumer insights toolkit to see whether or not it is the most effective and efficient way to gather consumer insights. Now, it is a totally valid question to wonder, if my current way is working right now, why bother to change? So here's the current trend we see. 94% of enterprises say data is essential to business growth. And we can see the rewards for a skilled data analyst out now is actually increasing so much at the rate that a lot of times the individual contributor are earning more than the managerial level. So what does this actually mean to us? We are heading towards a world where data is needed in every single job. And with that, we see that the data-driven skill set it will be a commodity skill set. It will be like how communication is equivalent right now. Like everyone is expected to know how to communicate, to a world where everyone is expected to know a certain extent about data, about how to read data, how to interpret the data, how to use the data. For some, it may still sound far-fetching, but that's the signal strengthening when you start hearing terms like data-driven marketer, data-driven product, data-driven strategy. And if we think about it, if data is so important to a business growth, this will eventually or should already be a core competency of the business. If it's a core competency of the business, it doesn't necessarily seem to make sense if you just rely 100% on outsourcing to a company to be conducted in a black box. It's eventually a capability that we all need to learn, our team need to learn, right? But going back to the question, right? Where do we find all this time? I mean, I know it's important, right? But how? So the silver lining is technology has made things easier for us, and it will continue to make it even more easier. So here's how to start. First, use a solution that do most of the manual work for you, or even all the manual work. For example, things like data cleaning, you don't have to touch that, right? You don't have to touch even distributing to respondent, no. And the good thing out there is there are solutions like that out there that are built for the end user in mind. Second, use solution that give you the edge of speed. Because the ultimate aim of gathering data is to apply and see results. Let's not waste time waiting for a research report to come. We need to spend time on how to interpret the data and acting on the data. Third, focus on learning how to design an intentional, specific, and targeted research. So, and with this, we'll be on our way to ensuring the time we spend on gathering consumer insights is going to give us the signal we need and the return of investment of business results. With this in mind, I would like to leave you with the last piece of note. To be agile, we need to build a consumer insight system, not a consumer insight project. Because a system is something we'll keep using, we'll keep iterating, repeating, and improving, and eventually be our core competency, be our competitive advantage. Unlike a project that's one-off, we just simply can't learn to be better if it's a project. So here's a summary of what we covered today. I hope I've inspired you of at least one idea to take home, and I wish that idea is something that you can act upon sooner rather than later. And for those of you who'd like to give it a try, I'm happy to offer a free trial to our Agile Research platform. So you can scan the QR code here to register your interest, or simply, click in that link. So if it's fun chatting with everyone about this topic that's really close to my heart. If you find it fun as well, here's my contact. I look forward to discussing more topics like this with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that really great presentation. A lot of really insightful pointers that you've had there, especially I think the consumer insights loop. Just learning about that already kicks off or gives us a clear picture of how to really start our consumer insight strategy. So now a lot of good questions have already come in. Let's answer some of them. So this is from Barry Uy. And he said that there are a lot of good cases and explanation on the presentation. And in the Carson case that you presented, how did he wants to know how did Vase.ai went about the collection of the data to determine the awareness of CARSOM and the barriers to its adoption.
So that time, first we need to understand what is the target audience of Carson at that moment. So that time, they were doing a lot of campaign around Kuala Lumpur, so a specific region, around a specific target, a specific age group. So in our research, we need to basically formulate the exact representation of those audience. So after we get a subset of that, we start sending out surveys to those people to understand if they have heard of Carson before. Now, once we have that, we basically have two groups, people who know Carson and people who do not know Carson. Now, for people who know Carson, we will then further go into understanding actually, when talk about the name Carson, what goes into your mind, right? And are you ready to test out those services? So that is the methodology we use, basically to understand what is the reason that is blocking them from trying out Carson in the first place.
Yep. So there's actually a great question here about the niche needs of a certain client. So are there any difficulties that we can face when gathering consumer insights based on niche needs of a client? Or are there any particular strategies that we can employ to come to such insights?
Niche can mean a lot of things, but let me use an example here. One of the niche cases that we often see is, for example, if I sell a product that target a really niche population in the market, and it's very difficult to necessarily find this population in the market. So in that case, I would say number one is always first ask if we're able to find the right people that you are looking for. That is my most key advice, because garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't ask the right people, whatever the research that is the most useful will not get you the right answer.
Yeah, so it's really just about finding the right people to converse with. Yeah, I think this question is kind of related to that, but it's more on like, how do you decide what sample size is adequate to represent the population? So how do you go about selecting the respondents, the people to represent the population breakdown in Malaysia?
Yep. This goes back into the significance area that you are willing to accept. So usually, let's say you want to have a confidence of at least 95%, we recommend to go no lesser than 400 packs of respondents. But secondly, it's not random 400 packs. The 400 packs need to follow a certain quota. We call it a quota, but in other words means, let's say take Malaysia as an example. Take an example, there is 30% of people in the northern region, 40% of people in southern region, right? So if we take that example, basically your research the 400 people need to mimic that percentage, and that is just one area that I talk about, that we refer to. But in Malaysia itself, we usually look at age, gender, race, region, and we need to cut through all four in order to represent the entire population to be similar. So similarly goes with other country. There's usually between 3 to 5 areas that we need to cut by in order to make sure that it is representative.
There is a question here. It's a straightforward question, but I think it's a really good, it's good to discuss it. So how do you know which research service to go for? Because a while ago, you touched a little bit about some tools and platforms that you can go for. So are there types of tools that are best used for a certain type of data? Maybe, I think that's what the attendee is trying to point at.
Yes, there is. So going back to the 3 types of data, we need to ask ourselves, are we trying to get the what data, which is just trying to understand the state, the behaviors? Or are we trying to understand the why data to know the reasons behind? Or are we trying to test your ideas, which is the how data? So these 3 different types do have different services that is the best, the most efficient. So depends on these 3 types of data, you will need to know the research services that you're looking out for is best for which data, and is that what you're looking for?
Yes, it's really just being able to identify the types of data and the best tool for those types of data. Yeah. So yes. Thank you so much, Julie, for the really great presentation. And I'm going to see you later again at our Fireside chat. Thank you so much for your questions. We haven't answered every question that you've sent in, but fret not because we're going to have another Q&A portion later on. So just keep them coming in. All right, so I'm very excited to move on to the next part of our webinar, which is the panel discussion. And it is my pleasure to moderate today's panel discussion. And what an honor it is to share the floor with the marketing leaders from top-notch companies in the region. So let me introduce you to each one of them. So joining me today are Gia Nina, the country marketing head of BigPay for Malaysia, and also Tanushi Rastrogi, the marketing lead for Popeyes at APAC. So unfortunately, Elia Yusof, the general manager of MSL Malaysia, will not be able to be with us today because he is sick, but we hope for his speedy recovery, and nonetheless, we're going to have a fruitful discussion. It's really nice to have both of you, and I think it's going to be an all-women discussion for today since Elia hasn't been around. But yeah, but I'm going to jump in and start the discussion with this really important question. So just to set off I think the foundation of the conversation today. So what does a successful brand insight structure look like for each of your brands? So I think I'm going to start with you, Gia. So what do you think that structure comprises? And as a marketing leader, how are you building this for BigPay?
Just for the benefit of the audience, my name is Gia and I work with BigPay. So I take up the country marketing function, and we're basically a very solid presence in Malaysia and in Singapore as well. And we're building reach across ASEAN. So I think, wearing the marketing hat, building brand insight structure is just something that's been very, very experimental, because working in a company from the ground up, I think I've had the opportunity to sort of learn and also sort of put things together in my capacity. So I think first thing to sort of break it down, right? Brand insight structure is actually an amazing, powerful, reflective tool, right? This is all about how well you know and understand your brand. And of course, it aligns also with your target audience needs. So you're talking to people. It's always, marketing is always conversations, right? So this is understanding what your brand metrics are. So whether it's covering brand awareness, reception, brand trust, value propositions, and aligning to your vision and mission statements. So I think when you have a structure in place, you put all of this together, it really allows us to understand your customers in a very deeper level, what they're looking for from you as a brand, as a product service in the market, right? And delivering this, how do you actually, it allows us to create product stickiness with our consumers. And to sort of narrow it down to answer your question in terms of what does a successful brand insight structure looks like, I think this is sort of like a little process. First you have to set your mission. You kind of need to know if you're doing a moonshot, what are you doing, and you got to know that this is a long-term plan, right? Collecting data. I think that's very, very well covered by Julie earlier, the what, the why, the how, and then communicating, right? When you have data always tells you a story. Your customers, when they purchase something using, for example, using our BigPay card, they would have made a purchase last night, late night purchase at McDonald's. It's telling you a story. They probably had a late night out and they're having a midnight, a snack or whatnot. But are we looking at the data and are we putting it in a process to listen very intently? And then the next parts of it would be to analyze this data, execute, and experiment. So this is always an always on process that we're looking at that's helped us build a structure in terms of what brand insights look like for us.
Yep, I really like how you mentioned about, brand insight is really enabling you to get that story from the consumer, just really being able to to set the consumer insights and really be able to know where they're coming from or their desires and their needs. Yeah, so I think it's really great to be able to that we're able to juxtapose, I guess, how a fintech does it and also how an F&B brand does it. So for you, Tanushi, as you operate in the APAC market, I think this is much trickier for you because you're really you're trying to hit different markets here. So how is Popeyes integrating consumer insights as part of your brand core and structure?
So Shania, to answer your question, I'll just take a step back and elaborate on RBI, which is Restaurant Brands International, that houses Popeyes, Burger King, Tim Hortons, and Firehouse Subs. And basically, we believe in the philosophy of keeping the guest at the center of everything we do, which basically trickles down to a lot of research, market tests, and ensuring that we back up everything with data to understand the guest. So it isn't different to Popeyes either. that we take an extremely guest-centric approach. And when we say this, as some of you may know, Popeyes is from Louisiana, from New Orleans, and it is a brand that celebrates its heritage across both the food it offers and the brand personality it portrays. So in the US, the brand is extremely popular and almost has a cult following. We're that brand that is known to have started chicken wars. So the challenge for us lies that when we're expanding into different markets within APAC, markets have absolutely no awareness of what Popeyes is, who Popeyes is. In fact, sometimes people mislead us for the cartoon brand Popeyes. So that's our starting point, literally, in some of the markets that we enter. And so understanding the consumer behavior becomes extremely crucial as we enter a new country and defining everything from scratch. So we typically start off with an exploratory qualitative study to understand the need states of the consumers within the chicken QSR and also sometimes just within the QSR category itself. And what this helps us address is close the gaps that Popeyes could fill in for potentially, or what we could own as a differentiation in that particular market. Post this, we do a quantitative study to size the opportunities that we've identified. And then based on these two studies, which basically gives us a lot of consumer understanding of their behavior in the category and in the and also how they're interacting with the competition. We're then taking these insights and pretty much arriving at decisions across every single guest-facing touch point. Most importantly, the menu, the restaurant design, the digital experience that we offer, and the communication of the brand itself. So, yep, a very extensive structure for us as well.
Yeah, I think it's really quite jovial. You mentioned that that Popeyes is actually being, it's being mistaken as the cartoon character. So these things they're quite, you think it's not serious, but they actually do affect the branding of the brand and the company. So you mentioned about the menu actually. So as an F&B brand, this is actually your main product and your main offerings. So I'd like to know what kind of consumer insights exercise that you're doing in order to customize that or refine that menu per market to localize it for each market that you have.
Certainly. So in fact, when we enter a new market, the most important thing, other than, I guess, setting up the store and the operations, is to ensure that we have a menu that meets the requirement of the consumers within that market. So for example, when we entered Philippines, deep diving into what the competition product mix was looking like was extremely crucial in us arriving at the conclusion that we needed to have spaghetti on the menu, because that's almost a consumer need in the market. And so even though the global Popeyes brand doesn't have spaghetti as part of its core menu offering, within Philippines, it was a guest need and we needed to fulfill it. And but given that Popeyes is a brand that is built on culinary traditions from Louisiana, the way that fusion works is that the sauce on top of the spaghetti is Cajun flavored. So it's got the essence of Louisiana in it, while being a local product that we developed specifically for that market. And this is just one example. There are, like, similarly for India, it's a no-brainer that we need a vegetarian menu. So again, understanding what that veg menu would look like in terms of what is the highest volumes that are that the competition is selling on a particular product. We take these into consideration before we define the menu for Popeyes. And this is just on new countries, but if we take a look into the existing countries like Singapore and Vietnam, where the brand is relatively established, there we pay close attention into flavors that are trending to innovate our products. So for example, in Singapore, we launched a mala cheesy chicken because, as you know, mala spice has been trending in the market. And yep, so it's basically listening to the consumer and then acting with agility.
Yeah, it's interesting that you've mentioned your entry to the Philippines, because I'm actually in the market and it has easily become my and my family's favorite. So, and I could say that you're really hitting the palate, right? So yeah,
That's great to hear. That's great to hear.
So as you've mentioned, yeah, so it's really just really being able to listen to the consumer and not letting every important insight slip your hands, to be able to just really refine the menu right for the market. So I'd like to go back to the world of e-wallets for Gia. So
Sure.
yeah, for you in the competitive markets such as digital wallets, because fintech has really been such an integral part of our daily lives now. So how are you using consumer insights to to help you in every stage of the brand marketing. So these are the product launches, the marketing campaigns, and also setting those future plans for the brand. So could you just walk us through and share with us how is it helping you, or how you think it will play an important role in these areas?
I think I'll tackle on the first thing, in terms of consumer insights role with product launches. For us, BigPay, we've launched multiple products, right? Whether it's in wealth management, whether it's in personal, lending. I think in payments, that's the bulk look of it. But I think we look at consumer insights to really help us make informed decisions as a business. So I'll give you an example, right? Launching a products, a lot of companies, we all start at a very good intention point. We think this is an amazing product. We're gonna launch this, into the market. We're gonna give people, for example, remittances first. But then when we speak and sort of engage with customers and get data inside, we realize, hey, at that moment in time, there's actually a more pressing need for the product to be launched and rolled out in the market. So this is basically for us to sort of take a step back and fine tune and look really granular and just sort of say like, oh, okay, there is a pain point in the market now. What do people need? People need personal loans. People need financial access, right? So how do we then take this information and data as a business and then make a decision? We then have to sort of, okay, look at a priority pipeline, look at where we are at in our scopes and, in our product rollout, and sort of say, hey, this can really solve a pain point in the market right now. Why don't we prioritize this product and launch this right now? Because we can help focus maybe on the B40 groups or the M40 groups in Malaysia. And I'll give you an example. When the pandemic hit, right? There are so many things that, we were going through a very uncertain time. I think if you Google that word, it's probably through the roof, right? Uncertainty, like uncertain times. And for us, it is exactly with data when we were listening on ground, right? Whether it is a listening tool, social listening tool, or whether it was a conversational pocket session with our consumers, they were telling us what they really needed at that point. And to give you an example, the B40 groups were tremendously affected during the pandemic. They had no financial access. Their daily lives were disrupted so badly, right? So how do we as a fintech player come on board to make sure that their needs are met? So it was financial access tremendously. So we rolled out campaigns, whether it was CSR by nature or was financial access and inclusion, to onboard them, to make sure the unbanked, the underbanked, and the unserved are being brought into this financial inclusion scale. That was a campaign that we launched. Nobody gets left behind. So we partnered up with a partner, Ikhlas, to make sure that we had donation drives, sort of brand, and to make sure that we sort of get into these places where users were left out and had no financial access. And I think through these brand insights, it really helped us razor focus on our campaigns. So to give you an example of a marketing campaign that was really, I think made a lot of sense to us using brand insights. We actually partnered in with Ministry of Finance on a project called ePemula, right? And this took a village. Every kudos to everyone in the team for sort of really coming together and looking at data as a driving point. So ePemula was basically very razor focused on the youths of Malaysia, right? And so we needed to know their pain points, their spending habits, brands that they really resonated with. And we designed a campaign that was at a national level, a go-to marketing strategy to roll out. And because of these data, knowing the what, the why, and the how, who were we talking to? What were we trying to address? What were we trying to deliver as a brand? What were we trying to bridge and connect together and sort of deliver solutions for these users, the youths of Malaysia? They're about sizable base, about 2 million at that point. It was a tall order, but happy to report, because of the data that we had in hand, because we were speaking with these youths, we were able to sort of curate that campaign to sort of deliver what they really wanted. It was a match. And I think the results of it, the ROI of the campaign, is, as all marketers love to, love to hear, is that we got so much of brand receptiveness and brand love and so much more adoption, which hits, essentially the ROI or / KPIs that we were looking to do. And for us, brand, I think every marketer knows that branding and marketing is a consistent effort. So it's never a full stop. So I think for this correct with data insights, it really allowed us to create the right kind of campaign, the right kind of messaging, and to actually get the right kind of outcome. And so I think just very quickly, even in another example is a hyper localization. I think this word is very important. Yes, as a product, we appeal to very large markets, but there are different people with different personalities and different behaviors. So a Raya ad, we actually launched a Raya campaign, and Raya is one of the biggest celebrated seasons in Malaysia. We actually did a really hyper localized campaigns with local heroes, local familiar faces, to deliver a message that Raya can be celebrated together, and how the use case of a fintech, not just as limited to e-wallet, but how fintech actually helps you celebrate your Raya better. Whether it is sending money to your loved ones using our P2P feature. As simple as that. We heard, we listened, we curated, and we delivered. So I think this is sort of the bulk of it. And I think to finally just sort of close it out, I think the future plans for the brand, don't be afraid to keep experimenting and pushing boundaries, right? Creativity is endless. And for us, what we've learned at BigPay, we're a bunch of really eager and fearless bunch. And don't be afraid to ditch what doesn't work, right? Don't be so rigid and to stick to something just because you think this is the way to go forward. Take these learnings, the insights, the data that we have, essentially to build superior products and to serve real customer pain point needs. And I think we want to continuously listen to customers because they are the heart of what we do, right? Everything that we do, the customers, the consumers are the heart of what we do and why we exist. And so as we continue to grow, we'll continue to grow brand love, authenticity in this space, and to always, to be in communication with our users.
Yes. I think with consumer insights, really a never-ending learning process. And I think what you've mentioned and what you've narrated is really great, that consumer insight is really not just helping you, find out the current need of the consumer, but also kind of trying to figure out that aha moment and moving beyond your original value proposition, just like what you've said in the Raya, that BigPay is now serving not just a fintech, but also as an opportunity for them to celebrate the occasion. So I just want to go back to Tanushree, and I think, with your extensive F&B brand experience, I think I really need to ask you this question. So you've been in the role in the industry for so many years. You've been with Burger King and now at Popeyes. So could you share an example of how consumer insights helped you build a strong F&B brand, and what were the steps that you took in order to achieve that?
I'll touch upon my experience at Burger King in Indonesia for this particular question, and give you some context as well. So Burger King in Indonesia, let's say in 2018, was rapidly scaling in terms of an aggressive store count. We were entering a lot of cities across Indonesia as well. However, the brand shared an extremely transactional relationship with the guest, such that we were only known as an American burger chain. And the biggest solve for the brand at that point was to build an emotional connection with the Indonesian guest. And the first step that we needed to take in order to do this was to define that sweet spot that would retain the brand's global positioning and the personality, and yet strike a chord with the Indonesian audiences. So to solve for that, we started off by deep diving into understanding the youth of Indonesia, backed it with a lot of primary and secondary research, deep dived into a digital ethnography, understood the shifts in the mass media as a way of understanding how society itself had evolved. And in fact, how QSR as an industry had evolved over time. And eventually arriving at a space that would be ownable by Burger King and serve as a differentiation across the QSR giants that have been in the market for years, like 20 plus years, whereas we were relatively a young brand. So the personality traits of the brand were also localized, defining with precision what would be cool and bold in the Indonesian context, and what would be too much or considered completely off limits. And in terms of the two key pillars that we arrived on after understanding the Indonesian guest, it was to integrate with the community and promote inclusivity, because these two stood out as very big ownable spaces for a QSR brand, which also would differentiate us from the competition in the market. And so by default, all our marketing initiatives, even if it was a simple organic post or a comment on social media, we would view it from this particular lens of covering these two aspects. And to give you an example of a campaign that was one of my favorite campaigns. It's a bit old as an example, but still very relevant. It was called, we strategically launched a Whopper for Peace, which was weeks leading up to the 2019 presidential elections. And it has caused a lot of debate and tension throughout the nation. So what we did was we partnered with Gojek, which is a decacorn startup, as most of you know. It's the national pride of Indonesia as well. And we partnered with them strategically to rub off their brand love and association of national pride that would rub off on Burger King. And us as an American brand, this was a very strategic win for us, because it immediately associated us as part of what is cool in Indonesia and what is loved in Indonesia as well. Then there are other aspects that have proved extremely useful. Was observing what content creators are basically creating on TikTok. What are they producing, and how can Burger King tap into these trends to humanize ourselves as a brand and also win on a trending platform. So it's really about picking and choosing what opportunities you want to grab. There are so many insights, like even Gia was saying. It's almost like, in terms of priority, what is the most sizable one? What is the one that will most resonate with the brand personality, and what do we go in for? So those are the kind of decisions that we really need to arrive on when we're looking for partnerships as well. Then the other one that we partnered with, which was really fruitful, was PUBG. We immediately managed to tap into the entire gaming audience by tapping into PUBG. And we created campaigns which were drawn from a consumer insight, which was basically around how female players were getting bullied. So we also brought in the aspect of inclusivity as a brand, tapped into the gaming audience, and created content that would resonate with the guest. So in hindsight, I think the right partnerships really helped the brand to grow, because there were different consumer needs that were being met by the brand via different partners across different verticals. And I'll just end by saying this, and Gia also iterated it, which was consistency. I guess it is years of consistency across every guest touch point, so the guest can actually resonate and absorb what the brand is setting out to do, eventually to change anything from a brand score perspective. So over time, what we observed was that in our brand health tracks, we started seeing a considerable improvement in the preference scores. And even with social listening that we would earlier do, we were able to validate the guest engagement and the positive sentiment that was coming our way as a brand. Whereas previously it was just complaints or people asking us for a promotion. So it's these shifts that you also see in the consumer engagement with the brand itself that can validate that what we're working on in terms of strategic partnerships or any campaigns that is working.
Thank you so much, Tanushi, for those insights. It's really just about exhausting the consumer insights and really be able to apply that localization and personalization across the board, such as on platforms. As you've said, partnerships are very, very strategic. And also, as both you, Gia, and Tanushi said, it's about consistency in the brand messaging. So yeah, so thank you so much, Gia and Tanushi. And I think it's now time for us to answer the questions of our audiences, and we've received a lot already at this point. So I think this is a really great question. It's addressed to both of you. So for both Gia and Tanushi, can you give an example of when your brand used consumer insights for brand image? So I think you guys have already mentioned some of that a while ago. So brand image rather than products, acted on results, and where you have reached a favorable outcome.
I touched upon it briefly earlier, which was basically the image of the brand, how global, like if you've seen any campaigns globally that come out of Burger King, they're extremely bold and they're extremely quirky. So for example, I don't know if you guys have seen that campaign, which is called the Moldy Whopper. It was basically to talk about how Burger King has cleaned its ingredients. And so it was a beautiful shot of a burger which was molding over time because it had no artificial preservatives as such. But when we look at that sort of an example for Indonesia, the audience is not ready for a campaign like that. So in terms of the brand image, it was extremely important. It is extremely important to identify what is that bold that would sit within the within the acceptability range for the Indonesian guest. So whenever we also, let's say, because as we know, Burger King is an extremely challenger brand. We like to poke fun at the competition. And sometimes, in the West, we take it a bit too far because that's what's acceptable there.
Yeah.
Versus in Indonesia, we can never come across as a brand that is putting the competition down. So it has to be articulated in a way, or it has to be dealt with such cultural sensitivities every time before we push out anything. And there are a lot of examples, but right now nothing is coming to my mind.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when you're really dealing with the local market, there's really a lot of cultural sensitivity in there. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
absolutely.
I think when you are looking at how you measure your brand, I think, success, your image especially, it's very important to be tone sensitive, especially in Malaysia in a multicultural setting. We've got different religion, races, and we're rich in all this, diversity in culture. So when we roll out something, we need to make sure that it's inclusive and it is not tone deaf. And so I think when we rolled out a Chinese New Year campaign, right, Send Prosperity, with, people would not expect fintech to be, they usually look at us in a very rigid light, but that's exactly it. We're also very similar to Popeyes. I think we're a challenger in this space. And so with that comes a little bit more notoriety, I would say, and a little bit more, I think, appetite to just sort of break free from the norm, because, the world is not just colored black and white. There's a gray area. There's other colors in the palette that you can sort of experiment with. And so I think by being very sensitive to the tone of voice of the campaign messaging and who you are targeting it to without hitting wrong other nerves is very important. And I think that helped us win a lot of brand love. I think on the other side, very, very extreme spectrum, being in a tech-based company, I just want to be very open with the floor. For those of you who work in tech, that there are obviously, sometimes, things don't go as planned, right? Not every day is going to be set and the way it's going to look out. So I think, communicating on a note, there was a time that we actually went the route of taking a transparency communication campaign. It was more of a crisis communication, actually. So we sort of, told our customers, hey, in the past 24 hours, this is what happened. This is what we're going to do to fix it. And this is what you're going to see in a trajectory, right? We did that as a result of actively listening, seeing on ground, and the team, from whether it was PR, whether it was social listening tool, whether it's social actual, just going on ground to kind of discuss with customers. We realized that the emotion and sentiment that was at that point, at a boiling point, was because of they just needed to be communicated with. They were not exactly looking for an immediate resolution time, but they just needed to sort of had someone. They just didn't want the radio silence. And so we acted very quickly and we communicated in a note of transparency with them. That, as a result, gave us an instant, I think, positive acceptance and receptivity. And people were like, actually, our consumers and customers were so empathetic with us as well. And I think it's a two-way thing. It's a relationship. We began to see the love go like two-way. And, our consumers were even bantering with us on Twitter, on, sending us GIFs on, Instagram. And we were just like, whoa, where did this come from? So I think that was just a very, very good example that I've had the opportunity to learn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really great that we're seeing a lot the differences between a fintech and, again, an F&B brand, but also seeing a lot of intersecting points, as you've said, the consistency, and also at the end of the day, it's always going to be the objective really is going to be the brand love. So yeah, unfortunately, we have a lot of questions, but we can't answer all of them at this point. So, but later we're going to have a fireside chat still. So you still have an opportunity to send in some of your questions. So thank you so much, Gia and Tanushi. What a really fruitful discussion that we've had there. So I know that our audiences have a lot of learnings at this point, covering the foundation for consumer insights, both structures and strategy. So thank you so much for the both of you. I'm just gonna bring Julie back to the floor for our fireside chat.
Hello again, everyone. Today we have a big treat. So how many of you wish you could directly seek advice from experts who have set up award-winning businesses before? Now, I am very excited. But before I invite our next speaker, Niraj, let me just share a few things about what you should know about him from his long list of achievement that I picked. Niraj is currently the partner of Accenture Song. And before Entropia joined the family with Accenture, Niraj has doubled the revenue for Entropia through signing on some of the biggest brands in Malaysia and grew his team by 75% in a year in 2019. So he was also the managing director of Ingenuity, a digital transformation studio he founded under IPG. He's a 40 under 40 Asia Pacific leader. And personally, I'm just mesmerized by his storytelling capability, but was genuinely surprised when I learned that Niraj actually started out as a computer engineer. So with this context in mind, let me invite Niraj.
Thank you for the kind words. It's always great to look back in time.
Honestly, a lot of us have heard so many amazing stuff that you and your team has been working on. And I personally is excited for the fact that today we have the opportunity to hear firsthand from you breaking down your thought process with us. So I'm curious, in your experience, what has been the role of consumer insights in your experience of delivering successful campaigns? And how important is that?
See, when we look at marketing and we think about branding and marketing in that perspective, and brand is something one has to really think about. It's not about the logo or it's not about the tagline. It's about your experience with that product and the company as a whole. So the brand primarily lives in your brain. It's in your mind. So your experience can be very different from somebody else. And a great brand is built upon the fact that it's able to identify great consumer insights and act on it. So think of any brand as a part of popular culture. Think of Netflix. Netflix ultimately, if you remove the whole fact of Netflix and delivery platform, it's a content delivery platform. So is Astro, so is Disney, or so is YouTube. But the ability to identify what kind of content you like, what are the trends in the market, and why you like certain things is what really differentiates. So I think before I go deeper, let me spend a little time on understanding what we really mean by consumer insights. There's a lot of data, there's a lot of stuff outside. So if you look around, data and trends will tell you what people do. So think of, like, in a very simple way, let's think of there's enough data to show that men in their 40s, and I put myself there, hitting midlife crisis, those men try to nowadays they're choosing fitness. So you'll see a lot of your friends on Facebook talking about cycling, marathons, Ironman competitions, going to gym. And just rewind back 10, 20 years, it used to be all about sports cars, motorbikes. So that whole midlife crisis itself has changed. And that is something data can tell you. So that's a trend. But what insight can tell you is, why is that happening? Like, why are these men not choosing a two-door sports car or a super bike? And why are they choosing fitness? And once we get in there, that is the insight part, from where we can actually start extracting what as a brand I can do to create that experience into my consumer's mind. So I think that would really be the important, and I would say that will be the fundamental building block. See, at our end, just to support it, we are saying that the world used to be very much about consumer centricity. So we had a consumer and we had a segment of consumer. So most of you guys will fall under, like, let's say, young couples trying to set a family, 30-year-olds. But now I don't believe there is a space for this static segmentation. Because if you look at all of us, we are living multiple lives at one go. So there is a life you have now. There is a life your mother is calling you on the phone and asking you how to do a WhatsApp video call. So you're a IT support to her, to your father, to your husband. You might be, or to your wife, and I'm saying spouse. You might be a guy who can repair things in the house. To your friends, you might be a guy who brings party and excitement. And to your boss, you might be a guy who's very serious. So again, we have multiple lives. And depending on platforms, our lives change. On Instagram, I'm a different guy. On LinkedIn, I'm a different guy. So when all these things are happening in a place where we are living multiple lives, static segmentation will not go too far. So we believe that, as a company and as Accenture, we are defining this at life centricity. And we are saying that, okay, life keeps on changing and brands need to give solutions that are continuous. They need to provide insights and they need to tackle these insights to give solutions that cover all manifestations of your part. So it's about consumer life cycle and the changes through it. And it's not about one static segmentation of saying 30-year-old household income, 2000 plus. Hence, he's a modern urban, gangster. No. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really like how you say, we live multiple life. I can be agreeing on person A on this, but totally agree with person A on another topic. You touch about life centricity over here, which I find it to. This is actually the first time I hear this concept. I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more about how do you recognize this concept and actually utilize that in, when you're forming insight-driven marketing campaigns.
Lovely. So I think some of my colleagues, Jia and Tanushree even talked about it because see, the world we live in is very, very different from the world we used to live in. If you've been watching the latest Apple ads, they're all about privacy. So we are sending out
Correct.
digital footprint. And if you really look at one person, it takes only 5 minutes to go to his Instagram and go to his, Google and find out what he does. So imagine the kind of footprint we are leaving. So fundamental difference in my mind between a digital world that we all co-inhabit and the world we come from is the ability to have footprints that are continuous. In a static world, when we do a market survey and we used to find out these insights, whether market survey, observational studies, ethnographic studies, the whole intent used to be observe, watch in a certain context and then move out. So when somebody is washing his hands, how is he using a soap? When somebody is buying a soap, how is he doing it? But it's no longer like that. We have a continuous stream of data, irrespective of the kind of marketer we are. And now it's our ability to look into that data. And I'm saying we don't even have to go too deep into the tools. Even tools like you have tons of free tools like website analytics or social media tools. And they are churning out tons and tons of data. What you're doing in the morning, at night, at any given point in time, what exactly you're doing is all up there. And I think that's what we define as life centricity, where we are saying that our ability to bring this data and their ability to iterate our solution. So again, let me get into solution as well, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? So I roll out a campaign and I roll out a TV campaign or out of home billboard campaign. I can't change it. What's on TV is there. What's on billboard is there for 6 months now. But on a digital, it's like Word doc. Every line I write, I can go back at it. 50 times I can keep doing that, So that solution of bringing the data in, putting some tech around it, and then making sure that I can keep iterating my solution. So simple solution example I'll give you. You go to a hotel site and you check for a hotel, and the same hotel will you'll be targeted to the same hotel. So the ability to hyper personalize is already there and it's available very easily. Of course, there are way more sophisticated products which we can bring in or which market has, and they can really take the magic to the next level. But at a very fundamental level, that ability to reiterate, edit, bring and married with the ability to capture that footprint of data or signals that you're sending on to the digital world, it's a little segment of one combination. And that is what we mean. Life centricity for us is the customer life cycle across his life as a segment of one. One guy, what is he doing? What can I offer?
Yeah, thank you for walking us deeper into that. I recall in our earlier conversations, you talk about a couple of companies, case studies or actually experiences, your war stories. And I recall you talk about L'Oreal, Foodpanda, Dutch Lady. I'm wondering if you can, share a little bit with us about this.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think one of the, like I said, there are tons of work we've done. And I think L'Oreal, let me touch upon that. So this is back in 2019, just before the COVID era had really come in, and we were in Indonesia talking to the regional client. And one of the things that came up was that the margins were getting hit because there was a lot of resellers who were evolving or coming up on platforms like Instagram. So these are like beauty KOLs, followers of 2,000, 3,000. And suddenly the women or girls in Indonesia are choosing to buy from them than to buy from a Sephora or the retailer. And we were wondering why is that happening? So when we dig deeper, we found something very interesting. A lot of the Indonesian girls were first-time users of cosmetic or beauty products in that category. And these girls, these so-called KOLs, they were the ones who were not just offering product, but they were also offering how to use the product. So think of it like, your friend who's like a step ahead of you, or your elder sister who's there to kind of, tell you what you can do and guide you on that whole journey of using the product. And from there, we took a little step back and said, okay, how do we compete with them? And we came up with a brand called Ayu. So Ayu essentially in Bahasa Indonesia means elder sister. And the brand was like a KOL, which is a virtual KOL, very much on Instagram, online. And we married it back to WhatsApp logistics. So you can see the product, you can learn from her, you can ask her any questions, your skin type, how to use a product, what product to use when you're going out, what product to use for office, party, work, and so on and so forth. And you can actually order those products on WhatsApp with IU and it will be delivered to you. Of course, we had a third-party logistic and all that whole thing we set up. So that I thought was a fantastic way of understanding what they are doing, not just saying that, okay, girls are buying from KOL, so I want to run a KOL campaign, but going much deeper and bringing in the scale that really moves the revenue. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, yes. I was just being memorized by, we all know KOL is trending and very important element. But I like the fact that you bring it a level further with the creation of IU and through ordering through WhatsApp. And you talk about revenue at the end. So this is a perfect segue. A lot of people stop not necessarily adopting consumer insights because they are very unsure of ROI. And if they cannot prove the ROI, it's very hard to even ask for the budget to invest in the first place. So how do you see around this? How do you ensure ROI for all the investment that you have involved?
So I think a fantastic question, because I think as an industry, we have been in this space so many times where we go to the clients and client themselves, so we have some fantastic client colleagues with us here. And again, I say, this is not about, again, it's about the scale that we are trying to hit. So there can be insights which are like very, very small, or the execution is very, very small, or there can be insights that we can take and transform the business. So now again, that depends a little bit on our goal. But there are a few things that are very clear, like pulling out insights from a digital world is not about the amount of money that you put in. It's not necessary, I mean, if you are a smart marketer or if you're a smart individual, I'm saying, and you've been called for a job interview and you know who's interviewing you, you don't need to hire us or Julie to help you, understand. You can just go to LinkedIn, type that guy's name, know a little bit of his background, maybe go to his Facebook, Instagram, understand if, he's got pictures of cycles or picture of kids. You have found certain insights into him that you can actually use when you sit down for your interview. Now, take that example and put it to your brand. So you have a website, you have a social channel, you have a competitor social channel. Forget about your social channel. I'm saying if you're a brand like, and I'm just putting an example. Let's say if you're a brand like BAT, British American Tobacco, you can actually look at Philip Morris page and see what are the guys talking about on Marlboro page. And you can learn from that as well. So the data is available in abundance. Actually, you don't need guys to spend money if the data is in small volumes. So if you just want to track one page or two page, just your own website with 20,000, you don't have to hire us. I mean, save your money. But if there's a scale of data that needs to be looked at professionally to drive something meaningful, that has a huge impact, then of course you need a professional insight. So in my career, like I've run a startup as well. So 2016 to 2018, I was running an e-commerce public, startup for children, personalized storybooks for children called Bookie Book. You can check it when you have time. And there we had only 2 people team. So there you look at, I was the guy doing all the insight generation as well. And Google Analytics was one of our tools, and we had 2 other tools for it. We had a free listening software, and they have enough power. Let me just give you one example. As a brand, you put up an article on a brand page and you have links to other articles. Now let's assume that article is about a 120-second read. And the guy who comes in, 50% of your audience is only reading, spending 5 seconds or 6 seconds. You already know they are not engaged. But if you know 30-40% are spending more than 60-70 seconds, you know how much they are engaged. Or if you are running a YouTube ad, at what point people are dropping off, and these analytics are available. So I'm saying there is enough data there. It's a matter of you looking into that data and saying that, okay, this is what is happening and this is why it is happening. I think more often than not, we tend to leave it at this is what is happening and never go into why it's happening. Of course, there is a huge emphasis on ROI. And we do say that if we start with the goal, which is the goal of improvement in certain KPIs, and look at the brand funnel, we want to improve that optimization, the whole journey of acquisition. There's so much we can do with insights. We can improve the whole process. We can improve our touch points, where we are going. We can remodel the entire budget. So the way we are spending, and we just look at, and I think there is a word in the marketing world called post-buy. So now imagine post-buys happening on a daily, weekly basis. And guys who are sitting on consoles doing biddable media, they do optimization every day. Now you marry that optimization with certain trends. Like today, there's a blackout in the city. Tinaga had some power outage.
I know, right? Yes.
So that is already an insight, right? It's socially available. Now, how did it impact people? Itself is an opportunity to remodel my entire touch point for the day and go out with a story that has a higher cut through. So again, see, the points are there, the data is there. It's our ability to marry the two and then be able to, produce something more impactful.
I really like how you actually, so we throughout the entire session today, 1 hour plus, we talk a lot about the skill of how to manage a lot of the bigger data size. And I think this is a very good place for us to end here and move to Q&A, because you just set a stage. Don't think about budget, don't think about ROI, get your hands dirty, look at the good analytics, look at the data that you have yourself without necessarily involving money. I think those are great advices. Thank you, Niraj. I will now pass on to Shaina to facilitate Q&A
just before
sessions.
Julie passes it on, let me tell you something about Julie. I mean, she spent half of her career and most of her career in trying to make research and insight more accessible. I mean, the whole motive behind it was that you can start even with a dipstick survey. So I think, again, don't get too bogged down by the scale. Scale will come in when we have a minimum viable product that works. We are willing to invest more. And I think as a brand, we always tell clients that try it first. If it works, there is no reason to hold back. Then we can make bold bets, but we won't make blind bold bets. So thanks, Julie, for all the effort you put in the last 6-10 years.
You put in 15 and more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Niraj and Julie. What a really great way to cap off the webinar. A while ago, we talked about the brand side with Tanush and Gia, and it's just great to be able to know the agency side. And I think we're going full circle, as what Julie has mentioned earlier, and Niraj seconding the motion that it's not, you don't need really big budgets now to be able to achieve your consumer insights strategies and your plans for your brands. So it has now evolved, and it's just being smart about what insights and what tools to use for your brand. So thank you so much again to each of our speakers, Niraj, Gia, Tanushi, and also Julie. So we entered the discussion today with the hopes of gaining innovative actions for our power up with our consumer insights, and our speakers' insights have definitely given us the foundation for us to be able to really put in place the data-driven insights as our brand savior. Thank you everyone. And as we conclude this webinar, we would like to thank Vase.ai, who's been our partner for this event. So we would like to briefly get your feedback on this webinar. So kindly answer the survey that we will be showing up on your screen upon you exit this session. So thank you so much to all of you. And once again, I'm Shaina, and until our next conversation.